This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
On December 6th of 1991, 4 girls closed up a yogurt shop in North Austin and never made it home. Jennifer Harbison was 17. Her sister was 15. Eliza Thomas was 17. Amy Ayers, 13. Closing time came. The gate rolled down. The lights went out. And before anyone knew it, the shop was on fire. By morning, Austin was a different city. The questions that would be asked for more than 3 decades. Who did this? Hung in the air like smoke you can't quite clear out of your lungs. We have an answer now. Investigators use advanced DNA testing and genealogical methods, IgG, to identify a single name. Robert Eugene Brashers. He was traveling, already tied by DNA to violent crimes in other states, who died by suicide in 1999. The tools that didn't exist in the early 1990s are the tools that finally connected the dots. The who is not up for debate anymore. The truth matters for the families at the center of this, and for a city that's carried the weight of the unknown for far too long. But the piece that we're going to be going through today isn't just about the man whose DNA put him in that room. It's about the long shadow the case cast while the investigation chased the wrong people. It's about the neighbors and classmates who became suspects because the story needed a face. About how bad police work, narrow thinking, and false confessions don't just miss the truth. They actively ruin lives. 8 years after the murders in 1999, 4 local young men were arrested. Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. 2 of them, Springsteen and Scott, were convicted in 2001 and 2002. Those verdicts leaned heavily on their own words. Confessions recorded after long interrogations. There was no physical evidence tying them to that crime scene. Years later, high courts would throw those convictions out, citing constitutional problems with how each man's statements were used, and new testing would exclude them from the DNA. By 2009, prosecutors dismissed the charges. On paper, that's a clean ending. In real life, it is a far messier thing. Imagine living almost a decade with a headline attached to your name that says you killed 4 girls, even if the law later says you didn't. That first headline will keep echoing. Try finding a job when your past is a news search. Try quieting a rumor when the rumor is the only part of your story anybody thinks they know. Springsteen and Scott walked back out into daylight with the law on their side and an online record that would never forget. You can't clear a conviction. You can't erase a memory from people's minds. For the men who weren't convicted, the story is no kinder. 2 grand juries refused to indict Forrest Wellborn. But not indicted is a legal phrase, not a social cure. The moment your name is spoken in the same sentence as a notorious case, the rest of the sentence rarely lands. People think they remember. The mind fills in gaps. You become the guy who was involved somehow. And that somehow is a trap that can last a lifetime. And then there's Maurice Pierce. He was arrested with the others, and later released when the case against the group fell apart. In 2010, he died after a confrontation with an Austin police officer, an encounter that ended with Pierce stabbed and the officer firing his weapon. A grand jury cleared the officer. The point here isn't to relitigate that event. It's to recognize the pressure cooker reality of being a man whose name has been shouted for years as the answer to a city's worst wound. Even when the law steps back, the label has a way of sticking around. Pierce never lived to hear authorities say out loud what the science has now made clear. The killer was someone else. While the wrong lives were being bent out of shape, the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy were living another sort of silence. They learned to navigate a justice system that spoke in hearing dates, appeals, and evidentiary rulings. They were told the case was solved, then told it wasn't, then watched two men sent to prison in their daughters' names, and then watched those verdicts unravel when the law recognized the confessions couldn't stand and the DNA didn't match. When the charges were finally dismissed in 2009, what opened wasn't closure. It was a larger hole. The story that had held that grief in place for them. The courtroom story, it was now gone. And there was nothing firm to replace it other than another mystery. Who killed their kids? Part of how we got here is simple. The crime scene was a fire scene. Fire chews through evidence. Water used to fight the fire, well, that adds a second insult to what was left. Early DNA techniques were nowhere near where they are today. That's real. But technology alone isn't the explanation for why 4 local men were marched through the center of this case. The other part of the story is us. How investigators get distorted when certainty moves faster than proof. The City Review in 2012 said some of the quiet parts out loud. It noted compromised scene control. It noted that hold back details, those key facts investigators keep out of the public to test whether someone actually knows them, leaked. It acknowledged that non-public details were repeated back to detectives in interviews, creating the illusion of inside knowledge. That isn't solving a crime. That's teaching a script. Once a suspect repeats a detail the public shouldn't know, the interviewer hears confirmation. A prosecutor hears corroboration. A jury hears, only the killer could know that. But the detail didn't come from the suspect's memory of the crime. It came from the room. Just facts of how the investigation went. And how ineffective police questioning can completely derail an investigation. So many questions left unanswered for so many years. So many names lingering in the ether. So many reputations destroyed. Then there were the confessions themselves. We didn't need to guess about the risks here. The research on false confessions in serious cases is well established, whether anyone wants to believe it or not. Tactics that rely on deception, about evidence, on minimizing the moral weight of what's being admitted, on the sheer grind of long hours without rest. Those tactics can push a person, especially a young or vulnerable person, into saying what they think will end the interrogation. In the moment, almost anything sounds reasonable if it opens a door and leads to sleep. Confession is supposed to be the gold standard of proof. In practice, a confession obtained this way is just a story coaxed in a shape that fits the room. The legal system has tried to correct for some of that in the years since, but it's often too late. Courts can tell prosecutors they can't use one person's statement against another without the right to cross-examine. They can say, this confession doesn't meet the standard. What courts can't do is breathe the lost years back into life. And they can't stop the human brain from treating a confession, any confession, as powerfully persuasive. Look at the Richard Allen case, the Delphi murders. Confessions clearly brought on by more than a year of mental abuse and torture of a human being. And somehow, well, he confessed. Must be, fits the box, checks, makes me feel good inside. Does it? So the rest of us, it makes you look like a really, really small person. If that's what you're doing to get the words to come out of someone's mouth that you so desperately want to hear. But words are just that. Words. They have to mean something to be powerful. That's one reason the case slid forward with such momentum in the early 2000s. The story told on tape answered the city's need for an ending. It just didn't answer the facts. That's a quieter harm that rarely gets counted. Every time a system grabs the wrong person and holds on, the real offender keeps moving. In this case, the man who did it was a traveler. He was already tied by DNA to violent crimes in other states. SA, homicide. He exploited jurisdictional gaps at the time. When Austin dug its heels into a narrative about 4 local teens, the person, the science it eventually points to, was never on the board here at all. The cost of getting it wrong isn't only the damage to the accused, it's the time you give to someone who doesn't deserve it. When authorities announced that DNA and genealogical methods had identified Brashers as a suspect, they did more than answer a question. They reset a record. Even with the suspect dead, that matters. It matters to the family and the families who finally get a name that isn't about the wrong men. It matters to the community that needs to know its institutions can say, we were wrong, and mean it. It matters to the men who carried the weight of this case for years, whether inside a prison or out on a sidewalk trying to build a life around a past they couldn't escape. What do we do with that knowledge now? One answer is technical. Update how we question people, record interviews end to end, guard non-public facts like evidence, because that's what they are. Put hard limits on session length. Stop using deception with minors. Remember that fatigue and fear don't produce clarity. They produce compliance. Another answer is cultural. Build habits that reward doubt. Require a second team to test the lead theory on major cases before anyone files charges or talks to cameras. Ask at specific points in an investigation what evidence would change your minds, and don't move until you have an honest answer. There's also repair to do. For Springsteen and Scott, that looks like formal recognition where the law allows it, and the support that follows, counseling, stability, a route back to ordinary. Texas has a compensation process for people who were wrongfully imprisoned. Money isn't a remedy for time, but it is an admission that time was taken. For Wellborn, who was named but never indicted, repair is harder. The law doesn't have a clean way to fix what public suspicion can do. That's on us, on whether we, as neighbors and consumers of news, are willing to update the story in our heads when the record changes. For Pierce's family, repair may look like something simpler and heavier. Hearing the city say without qualifiers that the person responsible for the yogurt shop murders was not the man whose name their loved one carried for years. That recognition doesn't erase what happened in 2010. It does set the record straight about the story that put pressure on his life from the start, though. And for the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, nothing about this is tidy. There will be no trial to sit through, no sentence to hear. There is a name and a scientific chain that ties the names back to 1991. There is relief that, or in that rather, and there is anger in the fact that it took this long and caused this much collateral harm. Both feelings can be true at the same time, and both deserve to be respected. So here is where we land. The yogurt shop murders are solved. That sentence doesn't wipe away the grief or the mistakes. It clarifies them. It puts the man who did this back at the center of the narrative and demands that we account for everybody who was pulled into the gravity of a bad story. 4 young men turned into suspects because a theory hardened too quickly. Families asked to carry a burden that should have been lighter and shorter. A city taught to mistrust its own institutions because those institutions preferred certainty to skepticism. Truth delayed breaks hearts. Truth distorted breaks lives. The cure isn't new technology, though technology helped in the end. The cure is discipline. Humble, methodical, skeptical discipline. Applied at every step, especially when the world is watching and the pressure to be sure is the loudest voice in the room. That's how you honor the dead. That's how you protect the living. That's how you make sure your next 34 years tell a different story. Now that it's solved, what do you think? Let me know in the comments section. What should happen for those surviving men, no longer so young, who were accused and had their lives destroyed because of poor police investigative and questioning and interrogation techniques? And are the police at fault for those techniques that they were using? Because if you look back in time, and again, you have to put yourself there, they were being told, these are the techniques you use. This is what works. They couldn't look ahead 30 years and go, we might look at this someday and think this might not be the most effective, when they're being told this is the most effective. This is what you do. So are they at fault? Or is this a lesson for everyone? Not a time to point fingers and indict other people for what they did wrong in this case. It's hard to say you did something wrong when you didn't know you were doing something wrong. And some may argue that, and you can argue that too. I might even argue that. I'm just throwing all options out there. What should happen now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already there, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski to find us there. And be sure to press subscribe as well. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.